2/3 of Americans want stricter gun laws. As it turns out, none of us wants to worry that a trip to the ShopRite for eggs and milk might be the last thing we ever do. None of us wants to skip a 4th of July parade with the kids for fear of being shot. None of us wants to have to memorize our kids' outfit in case we have to identify their body later. We aren't asking to move heaven and earth. We aren't coming for Sally's Second Amendment side piece. We want an assault rifle ban. We want red flag laws, safe storage laws, reasonable shit for a civil society. But Republican lawmakers sucking at the tainted teat of the NRA, they don't give a shit. They're too busy getting those sweet, sweet dollars to care about what their constituents want, to truly care about the human cost of their avarice. And anyway, there's big business in keeping us safe where we shouldn't have to worry about being safe. More guns, more locks, more drills, more. The security alarm of business alone brings in $25 billion a year. And enough is enough. You can't go to a bowling alley, to a restaurant, to work, to the mall, to a grocery store, to your church, to the movies, or the bank. You can't attend a concert, go to a dance class, or go to see your doctor. You can't ring a doorbell, use a leaf blower, hop in a car, pull down a driveway, bounce a ball, or ask your neighbor to keep it down. You can't check out a farmer's market, or pick up a package at the post office, or go to a 4th of July parade, and you certainly can't send your kids to school without worrying that someone will get shot, that someone you love will get shot, or that you will get shot. This is where we are now. This is not normal, and it's not okay. This is the upside down. And this reality is being imposed upon us by those who equate firearms with freedom. This is anything but freedom. And this is not a reality we have to accept. It's not the pot, the porn, or the video games. It's not too many doors, too few doors, the gender identity of the shooter, or the lack of good guys with guns. Dozens of people in Maine are dead right now for one reason. It's the guns. It's the guns. It's the goddamn guns. My guest on this episode is Noel Casler. Noel's best known for his outspoken commentary on Twitter, the X, and unveiling truths in his weekly car rants about his 25 years of experience behind the scenes in live television and in the music industry. Noel spent 6 seasons working directly with the Trump family on The Celebrity Apprentice, and toured with many musicians such as Bruce Springsteen, the Rolling Stones, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and many others. These experiences inform and guide his work as a stand-up comedian, giving him a unique perspective and many first-hand stories to draw upon, making his humor both captivating and hilarious. Noel's tweets and car rants are often cited by Joy Reid on MSNBC and various other news programs. Videos of his stand-up routines have reached millions, especially his revelations about working with the Trump family. Noel's a frequent guest on various Sirius XM and iHeartRadio podcasts, and in 2021 decided to officially launch his own aptly named podcast, the Noel Casler Podcast. We talk about the mass shooting in Maine in this conversation. It was our country's 565th mass shooting this year. We talk about the new psycho speaker, qu'est-ce que c'est, Mike Johnson, and we talk about Donald Trump. It's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast, Noel Casler. Hey, bud, how are you? Or should I say fellow DNC paid shill, friend of mine.
Exactly. Fellow paid influencer.
Yeah.
Good
Welcome.
to see you.
Good to see you too. I love a fireplace.
Thank you very much. Handmade with all these stones. I didn't make
Amazing.
it, but
Amazing. So how are you?
I'm well. It's been a year. We were down at the White House a year ago, and that was like, such a magical And of course, the right used the photo we all took to call us paid influencers. Nothing could be further from the truth. And, we weren't there for campaign purposes. We were there, to get the same information that like journalists get, daily readouts and stuff. We were simply there because they're trying to be open about what they're sharing and who they're sharing with. I was very impressed by them, and by, those of us that showed up on their own dime and on their own time to hand ahead of the midterms. And I think we made a difference. So hold your head up high on that one.
I mean, they are saying that increasingly, people are getting their information, which is, it's a double-edged sword, from, people on platforms like X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, from social media influencers, if you want to use that term. And to your point, what I was so impressed by, when you come from an administration that had the RNC at the White House, which is just like insane, you had the people who were talking to us saying, look, we can't go into that. That's campaign side. That's a Hatch Act violation. We are not doing that. We are just giving you facts. It was so clear that they understood and respected that difference, that line. And it's wildly ironic to me that, Trump used the White House like it was his own personal, campaign tool. And we get criticized for going to an event, like you said, like the press, getting information that was factual and being able to disseminate that information to the people who trust us and, believe that we have vetted what we're saying. And I think that's an important distinction. That is absolutely what we experienced there.
Absolutely. And they wanted to make sure we had accurate information, right? They knew we were already on their side, right? Yeah. We were invited there because they could see we're pro-Democrat, sort of progressive people, but they wanted us to have accurate information, and accurate information doesn't always serve them. Trump had Bill Stepien working for him in the White House, the head of Fox News. Trump didn't care if you were fake news, false information out to the public if it would benefit him. And Democrats, they're the opposite of that. I was very impressed with them.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest distinctions about us in terms of that, like adults in the room, that, often they are the loudest in the room, but what we have on our side is the truth and facts. And at the end of the day, I do believe that accurate information is the most powerful weapon in our entire arsenal.
Absolutely. The truth is what sets us all free. The greatest disinfectant is sunlight. And a lot of what we're suffering from in this country right now is misinformation, is people manipulating others, to make a buck off them or to keep them stupid so they can control them easier. That's pretty much the MO of the modern party. Yeah. They want to keep these guys full of fear and full of xenophobia and homophobia and all the other BS they're peddling, because then those people won't see who's really screwing them over. Right. The Koch brothers and the Harlan Crows that are buying up the courts, right. and the Donald Trumps. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we saw an example of that last night, right? Nobody knew what was going on with this awful shooting, mm-hmm. right? At first it was 22, it's horrific any way you look at it. I have a friend who's from that town. I've known her for a long time. She's a nurse in that town. She grew up with the shooter. Her mom was like best friends with that shooter's mom. Like that's how small that area is. And her 15-year-old brother would have been in the bowling alley last night because he usually went on Wednesday night. And the only reason he wasn't there was because like the mom had a Zumba class and they just happened to not go. But she knew that bar and that bowling alley, like where all the people were.
Oh my God.
That's where he could have found a crowd on those nights. And unfortunately and sadly, he did. And she, it was obviously on purpose and he was targeting them. But, she knew that information. Like she knew right away because I just reached out to her on Facebook when it was happening, but mm-hmm. I wasn't going to share that inside information, right. As it was breaking last night. And I was surprised that CNN and others were giving out, wrong totals. Numbers. Victims, right, without knowing the facts, because it's like it's always a mess. We saw that on a grander scale with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the terrorist attacks perpetrated, and then we had instant misinformation on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, that's one of those double-edged swords, right? So you're not getting your news from vetted and trusted news sources as much anymore. People aren't conventionally going to those conventional news sources. And so you're right. I mean, and I personally waited till I had seen CNN vet it. And I thought, well, okay, that seems legitimate enough. And then I shared that information. And of course, like you said, it wasn't actually accurate. There was all the chaos. And there's a lot of chaotic things to talk about. We're going to touch on the speaker. We're going to talk a little bit about Trump, but I did want to start with this shooting actually, because as it stands right now, last night in Maine, in a small town, Lewiston, right? It's a town in Maine. A suspect is still on the loose, who shot and killed at least 18. This is the number I think we most recently have, and injured more than a dozen, so around 13. And this is the 565th mass shooting in this country this year. And what we've seen is Republicans have actually moved away even from just thoughts and prayers. They don't even respond anymore. It's like a meh, what, whatever. And I just, overwhelmingly, I think the statistics bear this out. Americans do support reasonable gun legislation. A lot of Americans support an assault weapons ban. It looked like an assault weapon to me that he was holding. I don't know that much about guns. He's also a member of the military. And I think there's some maybe in like non-factual things about him being a firearms instructor, but he knows what he's doing with a rifle like that. And so my question, I guess, is like, how did we get to this place? Obviously, where after Sandy Hook, nothing changed, after Parkland, nothing changed, after Uvalde, nothing changed. And now we have a mass shooting in Maine, and nothing is going to change. Republicans are not going to change. They still think it's their God-given right to have a weapon of war. So how do we get here? What do we do? How do we get out of here?
It's difficult. Well, first of all, we need leadership from the top down, and that starts with President Biden continuing to ask for an assault weapons ban, which I'm sure he'll bring up in the coming weeks, and hopefully after the next election, we could get Hakeem Jeffries in at the House and we can reelect President Biden, and then we could make actual progress because, this is 20 minutes from Sandy Hook, this isn't, if there's any issue I've been involved with politically, it's this one because it just hits home. Friend was at Bataclan. Her boyfriend died in her arms. He was the merch guy for the band. Like, I still talk to her. I had to give a deposition, in a lawsuit that she has. And, I had a friend on the stage at the shooting in Las Vegas. I worked in the music business and the live TV for a long time, if your viewers don't know, listeners. But I'm an industry that gets affected by that. I had a buddy who was ducking for cover on the stage, in Las Vegas, and other friends that behind cars and stuff. So, and it's completely, it doesn't have to be this way. I talked to gun owner. I grew up in, or at least my high school years, in Putnam Valley, which is like, Putnam County, New York. It's not far from where I live now. It's kind of deer hunting, working class, middle class, lots of cops and contractors and dudes with a lot of C's and Z's last names and O's and apostrophes, the same stock I'm from, people that emigrated to this country few generations ago and made it out into the suburbs. And what I've noticed in that demographic since the 80s, Reagan and then Fox News coming on in the 90s, was that they get pumped full of this fear, and the NRA exacerbates it, profits off it, and makes them feel like if they don't have a high-powered rifle in their home, they're somehow at risk. Nothing good from the truth. I have, on the flip side of that, I have tons of friends in law enforcement. Given what I did in live TV and the tree lighting at Rockefeller Center every year and the ball drop in Times Square, like the Super Bowl, half of my job involved dealing with police and security that were protecting us. And I worked all through 9/11. I've been doing it since 93. So I've been in a lot of huge events where, police and law enforcement protect us. So I have a lot of friends in this field, and none of those guys want people walking around with high-powered assault weapons. There's a place for those weapons of war on American streets. And even the people I know, that are pro-gun, that want to have the 9mm, by their bed or whatever the thing is, even those guys are like, yeah, I don't see why anybody should be able to buy, a high caliber weapon with, a large capacity magazine. That's just insanity. I'll shut up here in a second. But one argument I like to make is like, they sell that under the guise of toxic masculinity. Yeah. It's like Don Jr. is, after the Hamas attacks on Israel, he said, this is why everybody should have an AR-15. One of the most irresponsible statements coming out of, an imbecile of a human being. But like, to say that, and no, it's the opposite of that, but even that tough guy iconography that gets sold to these people, they don't have it in England and Scotland. In Australia, dudes don't have these guns. And I'd put those tough guys up against American tough guy any freaking day of the week. You know, they'd be like, hey, mate, why do you need that? Let's just
That's not a knife. This is a knife. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's true, you know, like so we have to address that, because a lot of what we're facing is a cultural issue. I think that's what people fail to recognize. You know, it's have the facts and get them out there, but the other side isn't paying attention to facts. They're paying attention to feelings, and they're being catered to. They drive through their small towns and there's an American flag on every flagpole and a veteran's picture, which is a good thing. There's a little more nefarious things behind it, because it's meant to reinforce the sort of back the blue, you know, law and order republicanism stuff, which is complete BS, right? The head of the party's on trial in 5 separate cases now, or about, you know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this idea of like this toxic masculinity is just part of, I often describe it as this whole thing as like this sea monster with multiple tentacles, like many, many tentacles. And one of the big tentacles is fear, right? So that's one of the things where they get you afraid, what like Don Jr. with Hamas is now coming for you. And then you add the other tentacle, which is, while Hamas is coming for you, what are you going to do? You need to get a gun, and not just a gun, an AR-15. And he mentioned, I just tweeted about this right before we got on, actually. He mentioned an AR-15 almost every day in the immediate wake of Hamas's attack, where it was like he couldn't stop. And I kept commenting like, geez, you're really pushing this. But that's what they're doing, is they're priming and poking and prodding. And you have the other tentacle, which is xenophobia and hatred and intolerance. And then they, them, the other people, those people who are coming for your insert, the variable, whatever it is, it's an existential crisis or threat to you. So you have to be afraid. You have to hate others, but based on whatever they tell you to hate them for. They have to be a threat to you, obviously. And then you have to go and arm yourself, but not just arm yourself with a weapon that will liquefy a human body that was designed exclusively for war. It was not designed for any constructive purpose. It was designed for war. And what gets so lost in this argument about guns is that I don't think most people I know, reasonable people I know, are saying we want to take everyone's guns away from everyone. We want reasonable gun ownership. We're not, you know, it is your right to have a firearm or well-kept, gun of some kind. But we don't think overwhelmingly that anyone needs an AR-15. This seems like a no-brainer to me. And yet their argument is, I can have one just because I can have one because God said I could. And you don't even know what an assault rifle is. That's their other one.
Exactly. Right. Do you even know what AR stands for? It stands for, and I don't care what it stands for. I know what it was invented for, and it was to shoot through bush in Southeast Asia and human being and make it so they can't get back up again. That's what the M16, which is the original, weapon that all these modern things are based on. That's what it was for, because the M1 carbines or whatever the heck we were using in World War II weren't effective in Vietnam because the bush, the jungle was so thick that they weren't able to be lethal enough, and in war, that makes sense. Not that war made any sense, but that's what it's for. It doesn't be in a classroom. I was working on a stone store in Newark, where you're from, Jersey, when Sandy Hook happened, and we had a day off. And the next day we had Lady Gaga and Springsteen sitting in with the Stones. And I was like, stop the world. Like, why are we even doing a concert? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That was so beyond the pale. I know first responders in Sandy Hook that had to go to that classroom, and, I won't get into that, but we can imagine. It's like you said, the damage is inhumane, completely outsized from any potential threat. You can defend yourself with a 6-shooter, like with a good old revolver or a shotgun or anything like that, and nobody's coming to take that stuff from you, which is obviously another lie they use to promote the fear. So it's an excellent point you made, and I'll just say that the shooter had also liked a bunch of Don Jr.'s tweets regarding AR-15s. And this friend of mine who grew up with him, the point to make about that is that he was homegrown, right? This wasn't an outside terrorist coming in to attack them. This is somebody she with as a kid. And this is somebody that I argued with because she was right-wing and we're like Facebook friends and stuff. And I'm obviously very hefty and, I'm not really guns anyway. Like I'll let you have them, but
Yeah.
I'm a
Same.
tree hugger. And,
Yeah.
that more military mindset. And what I was always trying to say to people is even the conservative people is the reasons you don't these guns in your community is because this is what's going to happen. I don't even want to say mental illness because I'm mental. Like I have anxiety. I'm in recovery. Like, there's no shame in dealing with your mental hygiene. So that term can be off-putting, but my point is people can become so violently deranged, especially now with social media, which exacerbates those fears. It's like adding steroids to this. You don't want the ability for somebody to snap and do damage in such a short period of time. It's an obvious point to make, but apparently it has to keep being made because it keeps happening.
Because it's by design. I mean, something that I can't stop thinking about is this idea that this is a reality that that's being imposed upon us, one that's being forced upon us, which we have to keep refusing to accept. Because, like, as a mom, for instance, my kids are 10 and 14. Ever since Sandy Hook, when my son was here, my daughter wasn't here yet, but ever since then, the first day of school to this day today, when I drop my kids off, I think, remember what they're wearing, memorize their outfits. This is my reality. And the reason I do that is because I remember learning in the wake of Sandy Hook, and it, as you said, you spoke to first responders. I remember learning that some of those parents couldn't identify their children by anything but what they were wearing. And we learned that again in Uvalde. And so this is a reality that a gun like that, a weapon like that can do such damage to a body that a parent can't recognize their child. So as a parent now, my reality is I have to memorize my kids' clothes so that, God forbid, I had to go, identify them. I drop them off and I study them walking away from my car because I'm like, breathe, it's okay. And yeah, I probably think about this more, or at least more frequently than some parents do. I don't know that that's true, but it's a reality that they want to continue to impose upon us because it creates this space where they can seize control. Because I'm afraid a lot. And when you're afraid, they think they can manipulate behavior and choices, and they can. So they want to do this by design, create this false reality where we have to accept more guns in society, armed teachers, like that. More guns is clearly not the answer, but they want it to be the answer because in that space, they can seize control.
Absolutely. Fear sells. And it's horrific that you have to think that way when you're sending a kid to school. When I go to a concert now, I put on a mesh tactical belt because I'm like, well, I can use this as a tourniquet in case there's a mass shooting. Like the fact that thought is even in my brain, but that's where we're heading in America. It's almost like we all have a mass shooting out there with our name on it, God forbid, but it's like it's coming to every town. I live in a bucolic little town. I drive by the high school. I'm like, that looks exactly like Columbine or something. It looks like, and it was my true watershed moment, and with this issue. And, it's so disheartening. It's like you said, it's the fear. The cycle of fear only helps Republicans.
Exactly.
Right. After there's been umpteen doctrines, but after Sandy Hook, there was an uptick in sales of these kind of weapons because the NRA constantly goes, oh, well, now you need to go buy one. Look at Texas. Texas can be a microcosm for this whole thing, right? Because they had every tough guy in the world armed to the hilt, and none of them ran in and stopped the shooter in Uvalde. They all stood outside, not knowing what to do, in fear and the paralysis of horror. Because if somebody's intent on doing damage, you can't really stop them until it's too late. That's why you don't have the mechanisms to commit those kind of crimes.
Right. I mean, it's funny because one of these small victories I had recently was my son. He's in 8th grade, and his social studies teacher mentioned that the Second Amendment wasn't written to reflect the weapons of war we have now. It was those were, guns that took, I don't know what the statistic is, but whatever they're called, the round or musket or whatever, they took multiple minutes to load, I think. So you couldn't walk into anywhere and you create mass carnage in a matter of seconds. I mean, there was a nightclub in Ohio. I remember this statistic was like 10 people in 43 seconds. I mean, these are the kinds of numbers where you're like, That's not fathomable, but that's not what the founders had in mind. It is not what they were envisioning. It's not reflective of reality to make the argument that the Second Amendment covers these weapons. It's not.
Well said. And, I'll take it one further. The Second Amendment was meant to appease Patrick Henry, right? It was a wealthy landowner from Virginia want to sign off on the Pennsylvania Treaty or whatever because he was worried about a slave revolt and people revolting against him because it had just happened down in Haiti. And our founding fathers were like, F that. We don't want that happening here. That's why they created that, because they were trying to assuage the fears of, wealthy white men who owned other human beings and wanted to keep the upper hand in that scenario, right? So that's where it comes from. People don't talk about that, but that's where the whole Second Amendment BS begins, and yeah, I'm not far from where the Battle of Ridgefield, which was a very famous, Benedict Arnold was a hero then, you're right. They were using muskets. I got guys who stop by a property all the time and dig out, they're like, can we look in your land for old flintlock muskets? Right. But it's like, yeah, modern, weaponry has no place. It turns the whole world into a war zone, which is what we're seeing,
which is also by design. Yeah. And when you have a weapon that is so scary and so intimidating that an entire police force armed to the teeth is afraid to confront it, you have a problem. You know what I mean? That's clearly a problem. But we're going to pick up on the gun issue and sort of pivot, because we have a new Speaker of the House, MAGA Mike Johnson, who, by the way, I believe has an A+ rating from the NRA and an F on guns from reasonable people who are sane and have the collective possession of more than one firing synapse. We went through all of this nonsense, 15 votes to get Kevin McCarthy to be speaker. And then I don't even know how long it was where he was speaker. And then they oust him. Then we have this entire show circus where it's like, it's going to be Steve Scalise, and then it's going to be Jim Jordan, and then it's going to be Thom Emmer. And at the end of the day, who do they end up with? Let's see. But he's a Christian nationalist. He's anti-woman, anti-choice, forced birth, homophobic, and the architect of Donald Trump's coup plan. What the hell are your thoughts on that?
No, it's the worst case scenario, and he's what I always feared, was that like a slick looking guy with some rhetorical discipline would get in charge, because I always tell the benefit with Trump is that he's such a loose cannon, he can't help himself. He's just a moron, and he can't help that to the world every time he opens his mouth. Guys like this that are a little slick and have their Oliver Peoples glasses on and know how to, wear a suit properly can do a lot of damage to this country. And this guy, as others have said, he's Jim Jordan in a brother's suit, right? He looks like he's a moderate, let's get back to work guy, and he's whacked. He's crazy. We're in some of the same group chats or whatever. So I've been reading some of the some of the background. Oh, alarming. He was a running talk show host in Louisiana before he ran for the state legislature. And, he basically, a woman's place is in the home, right? He said on the dais, on the floor of the Congress, that every woman should birth, an able-bodied worker during their lifetime. And he wasn't saying it as a joke,
Nope.
So he wants to arrest doctors that that save a woman's life. I think he's, might have seen, I did a car rant yesterday. I hadn't done one in a long time, but I was just like, it's none of business. It's absolutely none of our business. And it's another issue that they use, like gun control. They use it as a way, right? Because it has a deep-seated visceral appeal to the kind of people that white conservative Christianity appeal, that vote Republicans, because they're in the suburbs. They're like, I'm a good person. I go to my kid's soccer game. I have guns, but yeah, I believe, a 10-year-old should have an abortion without parental consent or whatever kind of, did you see the Republican convention in 2020? They had some whack job come out and talk about how Democrats, they were doing so many abortions that they were piling up the body parts.
God. Yeah.
It was just like this insane rhetoric. It fueled the same sort of fear. And you have these very venal white men that know that they can use that to exploit the poor people that are under their charge. That's essentially what Republican politics are all about, is not letting the people that they're governing know who's really screwing them over. And the easiest way to do that is with religion and race-based fear. And that goes back, you can read Howard, The People's History of the United States. That was the original gig. The wealthy industrialists and landowners, when they started bringing over indentured servants, were like, hey, if the indentured servants, the poor Irish that are coming here, if they get in touch, with the African Americans they stole and are enslaving and figure out who's really screwing them over, we're outnumbered. Back to the Patrick Henry fears, right? Mm-hmm. So what they figured out was, if we can make, the poor whites hate the blacks or the indigenous people, or insert your favorite, demographic group that helped build this country, including Chinese Americans who built the railroads. And, if we can make that the battle and have them not look at us, we got it made. And the model continues to this day. And it's never been sort of in a greater effect or more potent now, because now it's billionaire 1%ers that you don't have a chance of catching up to. Back when it was just Andrew Carnegie, or the card, the coal mine or whatever, or the railroads, it wasn't as big a, the disparity wasn't what it is now. Like a nuclear powered, you're the guy working for Jeff Bezos in a fulfillment center. You're not throwing off your masters. You know what I mean? You're not getting to that point.
Right. And a huge chunk of this, too, is going back to like this idea of people being stupid, keeping them uneducated, so that they're like, hold on, you mean to tell me that a baby can be born and it's perfectly healthy, and then 9 months later, the mom can abort it? It's like, that's terrible. And it's like, nope, that's murder, because we have laws about that. That's actually murder. That's not happening. They're not piling up babies. Like, that's not happening. And MAGA Mike, he was also, there's a clip that went viral yesterday where he was like, so at what point would you say no to an abortion? Can a woman, have a perfectly healthy baby and then decide to abort it? And it's like, he's using a congressional committee to ask a question and then the doctor kept saying, I'm a medical doctor. We have laws for that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about abortion care. And every case is different. And she's using logic. And he's like, well, I'm sorry. So you're telling me that a 16-year-old get in a car crash and dad can be mad and they can be like, I want to abort her. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. It's not exactly what he said, but still, this is where we're at. And the stupid people, because that's by design too, are getting inundated. And this is the other piece to what you were talking about in the olden days. They didn't have 24-hour a day, 7-day a week access to these messages. And now it's like this constant stream of this tapping away, this like banging away at the brains of people nonstop. And these messages are like poking and prodding and then getting mad. And then you end up with a guy who kills a woman because she has a pride flag. And, this is where we're at. And it's also, again, by design. And now we have someone like that in charge in second in line to the presidency. He, by the way, claims is illegitimate. And it's insane.
Right. And exactly. And if the numbers stay how they are in Congress, he'll be the presiding over President Biden's re-election victory next year. And he's already shown us once that he's not willing to do that. So who's going to stop him? He won't. We all know he's going to be like, no, I'm saying this is illegitimate. Trump is president. And we're going to have, a congressional crisis unlike anything we've faced as a nation.
And they're really good at that. They're really good at these like crises we've never faced before. I mean, I did this one video about all their firsts, it's like the first president to be impeached twice, the first president to refuse a peaceful transfer of power, like first president not to go to inauguration, first president to plot a coup, first president to be indicted, second, third, and fourth president to be indicted. Like, I mean, they're good at these unprecedented crises, and we are not as good at responding to them because we don't have any kind of like roadmap, because we've never been there before, but they seem to thrive in that space. But speaking of an illegitimate president, let's just quickly just touch on Trump, because you know Trump. You worked on The Apprentice. You know what the charade is. You talk about this false thing that was created in this show, The Apprentice, and this court case in New York. Really, to me, I think of it as pay no attention to the man behind the curtain moment, because every single day what we see him doing is going out in front of cameras. I don't believe he needs to be at that trial, and he's going anyway, so that he can do his accordion hands, Orwellian. That's what you see back there is, do not believe what you see back there, believe me. And he does it every single day. And my thought on this is, better than anyone, because this lie that has already been proven, and because he's been found liable, is the lie, the mothership of lies. It's the lie on which all the other lies about him rely. Without this lie that he's this self-made billionaire, genius, real estate savant, without that, the whole house of cards crumbles. But that it's a facade. It's a show. It's not real.
Yeah, it's always been a show, but it's his origin story, right? Mm-hmm. It's the cares about the most. He's facing obviously much more serious things that he could go to prison for, and he could care less. He never even comments on them. Jack Smith probably has him dead to rights at this point. You know what I mean? He's going to be in a basement in Lebanon if he's not careful, and all he's worried about is what somebody said about the value of his crappy condo on top of Tower. It's so much that he'll show up and freak out in court like he did yesterday. He stormed out. I saw what you said. He does poop. I don't know if we can put this on here. You know what I mean?
It's fine.
Yeah. I saw him do it on the Apprentice set. That was all in a right? When they started filming The Apprentice, I worked on the Celebrity Apprentice, just so your viewers know. I dealt with talent in live, and that was sort of my little niche in the industry. If you weren't famous, I wasn't showing up, So I didn't work on the part that was just Joe Schmo, Illinois, who wants to work for Trump. But my buddies did. They were the crew. And when they showed up with Mark Burnett to begin filming, they went into the Trump office, and the furniture and stuff was so threadbare that they were like, nobody's going to believe this guy's a billionaire. So they had to go out and rent furniture. And when we did Celebrity Apprentice, because Trump didn't have a paycheck, he had blown his father's inheritance at that point. Strong-armed his siblings into signing it over to him, and they sold his dad's company for $786 million or something ridiculous that then Trump blew in short order. If they had just held on to that, the equities and the dividends off of the empire that his dad built off of his own malfeasance, and that's another story. Yeah. But if he had just had this acumen to not sell the most valuable asset that he had just been bequeathed, he would have been set for life. He sold it, was essentially broke when NBC gave him the gig through Mark Burnett, who, by the way, tried to sell that show in first. He wanted to do it about the Mir space station with oligarchs, and they put him on to Trump. They're like, no, you should do a real estate show with our guy Trump.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how it went down. There's a great deep dive in the New Yorker your viewers can read by Patrick. I can't think of his last name, but do Patrick, New Yorker, Trump, and you'll find it on the Google. But anyway, so, NBC big break again. That's why he brought in his kids. His kids, if you're a billionaire's kid, you should be like sailing catamarans, off an Nantucket. You should be like in a Formula One. You should be doing dressage, horseback riding. Luke is my next neighbor. His daughter has a big horse farm and rides horses because her dad's a billionaire. She's not on a game show on Sunday night on NBC, standing next to her dad, judging whether Little John or Meatloaf has a better pop-up shop in Square, right? But a real billionaire's kids don't do that,
Great point.
Give me $1 million, I'm not even doing a podcast.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to enjoy my life, but it's all about the image, right? Image is what he was selling from the 80s. His buildings were crap. His casinos were crap. They had the worst food in Atlantic City, the worst payouts on their slot machines. He would bus in women from Ohio and Kentucky and all these elderly citizens. He was one of the guys who innovated. People don't remember that, but he would send all these buses out to like rural Pennsylvania, and he'd give them a free ride to Atlantic City, put their slot machines, their Social Security checks into his slot machines, and he'd send them home without so much as a free lunch. the man he was. And when he'd walk through the casino floor, this was before my time, Louis C.K. told me this, he would have the security next to him to make sure nobody talked to him. Because, these people would be like, hey, it's Donald Trump from the TV, you know, let me go outside. And he'd be like, get away from me. Yeah, the other thing, he despises the people who supports him. He wants to be a left wing. He had Bill Murray at his wedding to Melania. Like he cares. He wants to be loved by the left, and by the left, I mean like Hollywood elites and anyone you know, he would love for Madonna to invite him over for dinner or something.
Oh, that reminds me of this whole, like you said, this whole like image that he was crafting. And there was a Madonna story back when he was calling, page sixes and stuff and pretending to be his own publicist. It was John Barron and David Dennison and I forget the other one. Yeah. So he had all these fake PR people.
His Valtrex, he would call in his Valtrex under a fake name too. So we would call him Captain Valtrex. Yeah. And he would make it up. Yeah.
Yes, we had a Madonna story that he called, whoever it was that was writing this, that he wanted to pitch this like salacious story to, about how he basically had to put off Madonna. She wanted to date him. And he had to say, oh, no. Women was throwing myself. And he barely disguised his voice at all. Everyone knew who they were talking to. I mean, he's such an idiot and so lacking in self-awareness that if he changes his voice just one little octave, he's like, no one will ever know it's me. Or, all the same patterns are there. So he's like, yeah. And Madonna, it was a real problem because she just, really wanted to date me. And I couldn't date her. I would think I was seeing somebody at the time bullshit. But he wanted to put that story out there because it was a whole, crafted reality, and it was not true in any way, shape, or form. But Mark Burnett, really, that was it. Like once he picked up the thread on this fallacy, we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. No,
and it was incredibly effective. And and mind you, when I started doing the gig, it was a joke. I told you some of the other shows I did, I would do the Super Bowl half show and the Tonys and the Kennedy Center Honor, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, like A-list stuff in New York. That's what I dealt with. It was a cushy. I would tour with rock bands, when I wasn't doing shows. And a friend of mine got the gig as like she was like the production court. She was in charge of getting in all the talent wranglers for the season finale of the first Celebrity Apprentice thing. And she was a colleague. She'd had MBA and other things. So I said, she sent an email out to our little group and said, hey, I got this gig. It's a big gig for me. A season finale of Celebrity Apprentice at Rockefeller Center. I'll pay you. You'll get to go to the after party. Would you do me a favor? Because it was her first big gig and she wanted to really hit it out of the park. So, she called in the sort of A team of talent wranglers. And I was like, oh, that show. Like, I want to see if Omarosa is a real person. Like, sure, I'll come and do it, Yeah. And that was the first season. We shot it in Studio H, which is where they shoot SNL. That's where we had the fake boardroom and all that BS. You're hired, you're fired kind of thing. And it was Morgan and Omarosa were battling. And that's, I'd already done beauty pageants in the 90s, but that's I sort of was reacquainted with him, and he had denigrated, this is when his Adderall addictions were apparent and all this other crazy stuff. I got to see, he couldn't really read a 3-syllable word and he would freak out on set. So the whole thing wasn't just an illusion. Like it was hard to get a coherent take from him. He wouldn't show up a lot of days. When they were taping I did the finale, right? But like they taped for 4 weeks before we shot that. He was just a mess. And in the beginning, would take care of the celebrities that were involved, friends of mine, Cyndi Lauper, people like that. And then they assigned me to Ivanka. When Ivanka pushed out George Ross or whatever, he had an old man with white hair who was his sidekick, if you remember.
Yeah, sure, of course, yeah.
Right, and he was beloved, so Trump got jealous and kicked him out and made Ivanka like his right-hand man or woman. Yeah. And they assigned me to Ivanka because I was the guy in live TV who handled Madonna, who handled Michael Jackson or the host of the whoever it was. The more difficult assignments, they wanted kind of a diplomatic person to do it because I used to be diplomatic, and keep my mouth shut, so I was the Ivanka handler, which was a nightmare. She was like the only one to get a trailer. I would have to show up 5 hours early to let her glam squad in. I was there through the whole like romance with Jared. They broke up. Wendy Dang Murdoch told them to get back together. Then the next season they were getting married. And those kids were running the show. Here's another point up. I know I'm long-winded. I apologize. I speak in parables.
I love this.
But they were running the show. Trump, Trump wants to music to play when he walks in the room. He wants to get high and he wants to hit on women, right? It's all about what can feed his narcissism in the moment. You saw that yesterday in court when he storms out and then gets ordered back. It's all about his ego getting attacked in real time. There's no self-discipline or long game with him. Jared and Ivanka clearly wanted the world, right? And they were the ones behind the scenes sort of whispering in his ear about things. She was the one who would talk him down. The breathy, cooey, sibilant-esque porn star voice that she puts on is complete BS. Her real voice is like 2 octaves lower in real life, and she curses like a sailor. But she puts on this breathy thing because it turns him on, and she knows how to manipulate him in a soft, sexual way. It's eerie. I've seen him lap dances. That's not a joke. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Brain bleach. Oh my God. No. And knowing that he fantasized about her in public in front of people at the White House to the point where John Kelly had to say, that's your daughter. Like, and that she played that up. I want to puke. Oh my God.
She totally played it up. And anybody who spent more than 10 minutes around Trump knows that he works that into a conversation. I mean, look at her, sweet piece of ass, right? Imagine that. No, I'm not even kidding. I got buddies who played golf with him, and like, I mean, we don't have to, it gets a lot darker. You know, he was a frequent buddy of Jeffrey Epstein and visitor to his townhouse. And he did all horrible things that I unfortunately know about. And I know some of the people he did them to, not the public ones. And I can't tell their story because it's not my story to tell, you know, and, but, you know, and the E. Jean Carroll tells you everything about him, that story right there, that he would attack a woman in a dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman and then just walk back to his office or walk out to his security team and get in his That's the kind of stuff he did with impunity his whole life, right? So, and I'll shut up, but to get to my point, the reason I did this show as a joke in the beginning, and Trump was a joke. He wasn't running for president at this time. You know, he did the Obama's birth certificate thing, and I think that's when he started to kind of lose it with NBC or whatever. But there was no, I'm running for president on the horizon when I worked for him. When he announced, I said to my colleagues, we have to like come out and tell everybody what we saw because can't get anywhere near the presidency. And my colleagues were like, dude, we signed an NDA. We'll never work again. He's not going to get elected. Like, I can't go against the DGA. I can't risk, because Mark Burnett told everybody if they started to talk, he would sue them. Right. And that kind of went through the industry and shut everybody up. A friend of mine was working on Hillary's campaign. She goes, Noel, I see you're spilling the beans on Facebook and online and stuff. Would you be willing to talk to Hillary's campaign? I was like, heck yeah. You know, so I talked to her campaign people. I told them what I knew. I talked to People magazine. They were going to do a big piece on it, and somehow it got and killed. I think Hillary's campaign kind of felt like they were going to win anyway. And when I spoke with them was right before Access Hollywood broke. So I talked to him, and then like a few days later, the Access Hollywood story broke. And I think they thought, oh, well, he'll never get elected now. You know, of course, they didn't know what James Comey had up his sleeve a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
They didn't, I don't think they took my warnings seriously. And, you know, we all know what happened in November of 16. And that's when I left my career. I'm done. I said, I got to just talk about this guy any chance I get because people need to know this. And that's when I went into stand-up, because that was really my only avenue to speak out. I could get up on a comedy stage and be like, here's who this guy really is. You know what I mean? Because in the beginning, media was kind of going along with it.
Yep.
Right? They saw his reality, and I'll shut up. But I said to my colleague, they said, I'll never work again. Like if we break an NDA, I said, if this guy's president, you're not going to work again anyway, because he's going to ruin this country. And what happened? He mishandled COVID and we shut down for a year and a half. There wasn't any production or anything for a long time because, you know, not that COVID was his fault, but all he thought about was himself when it happened. And that's not what you want in a leader. You want somebody who thinks about other people all the time, like Biden, you know?
Right. And it was about himself, but also what can you do for me, to the point where it was like, are you a nice governor or not a nice governor? And like, where you live in New York, you know, I've driven through parts of New York State where I'm like, holy crap, this is so Trumpy. This is so red. Where I live is very, very red. But overall, the state voted Biden, and he was willing to hurt people in blue states. And I'm thinking, as I'm driving through your state, I'm like, you know, buddy, with the Constitution on the side of your house and the Trump flag and the Confederate flag, he was going to keep you from having access to like life-saving COVID medicine and and all the things and the supplies, because you live in a state that voted for Biden. And he's so like endlessly like narcissistic that he wants to make all of you punished, punish all of you suffer. And he's going to punish his own people. Again, like you said, he so often he despises the people who actually support him the most, but he's grossed out by them, but he also wants to inflict punishment on them if it makes him feel better about himself.
Yeah. And that's the worst thing. I mean, that's the first thing he did, right? He knew like New York State didn't vote for him. One of the first things he did was take away the tax credit that people got on our thing. So in effect, we got our house in like July of 2016. And by the next year, the property taxes had doubled to almost like 20 grand a year. He paid 700 grand, by the way, or no, $700 in property taxes on Bedminster in 2020 on 113 acres, prime New Jersey real estate. He paid $700 because he keeps 12 goats and uses a loophole, a farming loophole, on the estate. Sorry.
And now it's a graveyard.
Right. And now, exactly. Now it's a graveyard. I mean, it's just the scamming, but to your point of punishing, that's instantly what he did. He was like, all right, you guys didn't vote for me. I'm going to punish you. And, like you said, 60% of the people in New York State are Trumpers now. The idiots that are voting for him in Putnam County paying twice for their ranch house, in property taxes and their quarter of an acre because of this clown, and he can still use that to his effect, right? Because he can say the Democrats raise your taxes, vote for. That's why Florida was so hot for a minute before people realized what a clown DeSantis was. All the kind of towny folks I knew in New York, they all wanted to move to Florida. It was the new promised land for mediocre white suburbanites.
Right. And it's so much, it's really all about the mythology. It's all that with Ivanka, that he's a family man, is that mythology, or that he's a, devout Christian, and there's that mythology, and that he's America first, there's that, maybe he's a patriot, all the mythology. And like we said at the beginning of this, it all rests on this one lie where he is very, 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 very worried that the mothership of lies will be exposed about him. So he's at court every day, violating his gag order, which, I mean, what are they going to do next? Like, seriously, you got to do something more than a $10,000 fine to the guy to make him shut up. But like, it's a circus. But okay, we've covered all the subjects I wanted to cover. Thank you for that. It was an excellent conversation. But now we do the icing on top of the, meat cake, which doesn't make any sense. But let's call the conversation the meat. And then this is icing, which doesn't go on meat. But I mean, eat how you eat. And who am I to judge? Okay, so that brings us to the totally random question segment of the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast. Are you ready, Noel?
Yes, I am.
Okay. These are very serious questions with massive implications for world peace. Number one, do you believe in aliens or ghosts?
Both.
You do?
Yeah, I've seen both. I haven't seen aliens. I did see a UFO when I was in high school in Putnam Valley. And in the 80s, my town was known for UFO sightings. They even had a research center there because there's a lake called Lake Oscawana. And these things like when you see a video of a UFO, that's what it looked like. A big circle with lights all around it. I saw one night with a bunch of other dudes, being a Vietnam vet who was not like some hippie liberal type. And he was like, I don't know what that is. So, I've seen UFO and I've lived in haunted houses. My childhood was spent in Maryland. I moved to New York when I was like 14. But in Maryland, my mom was always living in these old Civil War farmhouses. That were used as hospitals in some battle. And, I've seen some spooky things. Like, if you don't believe in ghosts, go to Gettysburg and stay there at twilight. Wait for the sun to go down and start walking around and tell me you don't believe in ghosts. So yes, I believe in both.
That's cool. I've never, I thought maybe I saw something and other people had reported something in town in Lafayette, New Jersey when I was like 13 or 14, and other people reported it too, but I still don't know what it was. And I did not believe in ghosts until I met my now ex-husband and went to his very old house and saw clear as day the ghost that his sister had been seeing standing in her doorway from when she was little. And I described what I saw, and she said that is exactly who this is. And a psychic confirmed his name and that he liked that doorway and all the things. And I was like, okay, so now I'm a believer. And it's pretty naive of us to think that there aren't aliens, that it's just us out there like floating around with intelligent life. Like that's so American of us, isn't it?
I know, exactly. There's something out there.
Yeah,
what I mean?
Yeah, there's probably Earth 2s. I mean, honestly, we don't know what's out there. Okay.
100%.
Yeah. All right. We've established that we both believe in aliens and ghosts. Okay. Number two, if you could, this is more profound. If you could uninvent something, what would it be and why?
Automobile engine.
Really?
Combustible engine. Yeah, I wouldn't have cars. I think, ultimately beyond the political stuff and the guns and the wars, the heating this planet is destroying us faster than anything else. We haven't even talked about Acapulco, not just you and I, but any of us in the last 24 hours. And that city got hit with one of the world's most powerful storms. In my mind, you look at all the railroads and all the pollution and all the cars and how we paved this planet, right? To make it easier to get from point A to B. We fenced in nature and wildlife, right? We destroyed vast swaths of it, to make this convenience been around for 100 years and change, right? It's a relatively short timeline we've even had this technology, and the planet is on the brink right now because of it. Not to mention all the wars that have been fought over what? Oil, right? Over keeping control of a finite resource, right? Sooner or later, it's going to run out, right? That only so many dinosaur bones and old leaves or whatever the heck crude oil comes from, right? There's only so much of it, right? And solar power, wind power, all these other high-tech things and protect nature. So if I could wipe anything out, the diesel engine, or the not combustible engine, whatever.
Yeah, I love it. I wouldn't have ever thought of that, but I love the way you just explained that, because it makes so much sense. And that there's all this pushback against the Biden administration, trying to transition the auto industry to a green and sustainable industry. And there's like, no, you can't do that. That's not American. And it's like, this is why they're striking. It's like, no, that's not why they're striking, but that's what they're doing anyway, because of course they control the narrative. And if they can lie and say that engines and diesel and oil is real good, when we really just handing power to the Russians and the Saudis essentially, and then got Jared back in the mix over there with his $2 billion paycheck with his bone-sawing BFF. I love the implications of going back in time and uninventing what you just, the combustible engine. I'm going to remember that, actually, because if I ever go back in time, that's what I'm going to do. All right, third question.
Look, the house I live in was built in 1853. There was no cars. You had a horse barn out back, and you used a horse to get to the next town or whatever. I'd love to wake up in a world where that was, I got in a horse and buggy, and like there wasn't cars on the road too. Like I know I could go to Pennsylvania Dutch country and have that experience, but it wouldn't be the same,
Yeah, I once learned that I'm only 50 minutes from the city, and I once learned that by coach it was like a day and a half long journey to get from my town to Manhattan, which is, crazy. But then back then it was an all day affair to get from Lower Manhattan to the Dakota. Right. But I digress. Okay, last and final question: how long would you last in the Hunger Games?
I never saw it.
Oh shit. Okay. Well, then let's do zombie.
And I love Jennifer Lawrence. I think she's awesome, but I don't know what the premise is. So my answer would be disingenuous.
Let's rework it. We'll reframe it. This is one of my favorite ones to ask a lot of people anyway, just to see where they land. Let's call it a zombie apocalypse. How long would you last in a zombie apocalypse?
I'd last a long time, I think. I'm pretty wily, Yeah. I'm one of those guys. I'm little, so you'd probably count me out, but I'm vicious and tenacious. My favorite. Both of my grandfathers served in the Foreign Service. My grandfather was OSS of World War II and a big diplomat kind of guy for his whole career. And my other grandfather was NSA analyst who worked in the Mideast most of his career. So, there's strategy involved in surviving a zombie apocalypse, and is The Walking Dead isn't that zombies?
I think so. I've never seen it, but I think so.
I never have either. Okay. I met that guy at CNN Heroes who was one of the stars from Twitter and came up to me. He's like, "Are you Noel Casler from Twitter?"
So cool.
And I'm working behind the scenes. I'm like, "Yeah, you're one of the famous people here. How do you know who I am?" And he's talking to me. Yeah, and I'm like, "What's your show again?" And he's like, "It's The Walking Dead, bro. It's a hit show."
Seriously famous show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm lucky I saw Game of Thrones. I'm not the
That's
biggest.
How I am.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to end the conversation. But first, before we do, you've got your own podcast, obviously, the Noel Casler podcast. What else are you working on?
Absolutely. Noel Casler podcast. And I have Noel's Notes on Substack, which I'm proud of because I can do deeper. I know you're putting out on there too. It's refreshing after the limited characters of Twitter and the rapid back and forth where you can never really stretch out a point without somebody jumping in with a contrary thing or a troll. It's nice to say, let me just breathe for a minute, put my thoughts down on paper in 1,500 words, take my time with it, and really put some work into these points I'm trying to make about these difficult things, which I applaud you for trying to explain to people every day and to keep this dialogue going, because it's important, right? Because, I make this analogy. The right-wing ecosphere, and the White House knew this. It's part of the reason we were all invited there, right? Because they're not great at messaging. Because the right wing is like Metallica, right? They got a stadium sound set. And the left wing is like 3 people with acoustic instruments in a church parking lot, Like, do you want to hear about, like job equality? Right. And they're like, everything will kill you, like, it's hard to compete with that, right? But if you can draw people in emotionally with the laughter, with what, your tweets do, and they get shared, and then you can steer them towards something where they can really think about it, and then go do their own research, so to speak, not in a, crazy football or anti-vaxxer way, but, in a smarter way. That's Noel's notes on Substack. I'm proud of that. Noel Casler podcast I put out when I feel like it. I did it every week, like 2.5 years, and the news is too bad now, that I did one a couple weeks ago. I'll do one this weekend, but I do it when I can. But folks can find me. They know who I am. I'm famous.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to forever remember the Metallica reference, because that is a perfect analogy. And I am definitely not a 3-string, like whatever group of guitar or acoustic guitars. Right. I'm more of the, I guess I'm more of the recorder played by a hangry kindergartner, like in the background. It's going that's sort of me, because I don't believe that when they go low, we have to go high all the time. I think sometimes you got to meet them where the fight is. And sometimes that's down in the mud. And, I don't want to be dirty like the pig likes it to be, but I don't believe that we always have to take the high road necessarily. And we do have to meet the moment. But to that point, you said, earlier on that when, you decided that you were going to just say, I'm going to fuck it. I'm not going to have a career. I'm going to speak up. I need to speak up. This is too important. That is exactly what you're continuing to do now. And these conversations are so important to that end. And we do have to all keep doing that, because it's not hyperbole to say that democracy is at stake. I mean, look who the Speaker of the House is now, second in line to the president. So the more we talk about the truth, the reality, not only of Trump, but of Mike Johnson and of MAGA and of the Republican Party as a whole, because yesterday's vote was unanimous, the better off we'll all be, because the dismantlement of the truth and facts is Orwellian, but that is the goal. So we can't let that happen. And I appreciate you for doing that all the time.
Thank you. And we have a year from now when we're speaking, we're going to be within a week of the election, right? A year goes by quick, as we, even years as long as the ones we've been having recently. So keep up the good work, Joe. And thanks for having me, man. What a blast.
Thanks for coming on. It flew by. I know I always keep everybody far too long, and then I'm always apologizing for keeping them far too long. But when the conversations are this good, it's like, there's no place to end this right now, because it was just, I wouldn't have gotten to your Metallica. I never laughed harder, honestly. Trey Crowder had me close when he described how he would do in a zombie apocalypse, but your Metallica comment was probably the funniest one I've had yet on the podcast.
What about my master comment?
What? Wait, you cut out. What did you say? You were what?
Master Bates. Remember we're in the White House meeting?
Okay, you made me almost wet my pants in laughter in the White House. And I was like, while very professional people were saying very professional things, you were sitting next to me and you were getting me in so much trouble, because I was like, I'm very professional. Look at me, I'm wearing a suit jacket. And you were like Master Bates. And I couldn't stop laughing. So thanks for that. Thanks for that a lot. I'm sure that's why I haven't been back.
Exactly. Sorry. Well, they didn't, but just for reference for your listeners, a guy named Andrew Bates, who's one of the White House people, came in and to give another talk to us and leaned to Joe. And I said, it's Master Bates.
That was all it
took. You can take me to the White House. Yeah. I'm still going to be a comedian.
Oh my God. Same. It's infamous now, but I did the picture where I was in the White House outside of the vice president's husband's office and the Capitol, what's it called? The big erection, the
Washington Monument.
Thank you. That one. Holy shit. I did the, famous, like, oh, look, I'm holding the chair, did the thing. And like, someone put it on social media. Why? But thanks a lot. And yeah, I'm a 12-year-old boy many times. So Master Bates was like the perfect joke to make in the White House, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for that. Even though I was mortified, but anyway, on that note, that does it for this episode of the Are You Effing Kidding Me podcast with JoJo from Jerz. Thank you so much, Noel Casler. This was an incredible conversation. I'm really grateful for you. And that about does it. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Keep up the good work.
You too. And I'll see everybody else next week.
You got it.